Okay, in chapter 16, lesson 3 is on blood, and this is the first part. Now, God tells us in Leviticus that the life is in the blood. And Leviticus is one of the oldest books in the Bible. And for a long time, scientists did not know that. Just think about when George Washington, that era, how or what did they think caused a person to be sick? Their thought was bad blood. And so how then did they cure people who were sick? They actually would bleed them. They would cut them and bleed them, or they would put leeches on them to suck the bad blood out. Now, it's interesting that they say that George Washington would have lived had he not been bled. So this supposed cure because bad blood actually killed many people, because the life is in the blood. It wasn't bad blood that was making them ill. So the life of an individual depends on the continuous supply of blood to all parts of our body. If this supply should fail, then the cells die, the organs die, we die. Now, make sure you can know and list the functions of the blood. They transport substances, and of course we've learned one, and that's about oxygen, but we're going to learn some more. They also help to maintain body temperature and fight disease. So 3 functions we're going to look at. In transporting substances, it's not just oxygen and carbon dioxide that blood is transferring. Blood transports many different substances throughout our body. And most of the substances are carried in blood are dissolved in the liquid portion of the blood, which we'll be talking about later, called plasma. And some examples of some things that are transported: food, nutrients. Of course, we talked about oxygen and carbon dioxide. Hormones, waste products, not just carbon dioxide, but the waste products that are left over from the cell processes. And enzymes. Body temperature. Our body temperature is usually around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 37 degrees Celsius. Our blood is helping to maintain that temperature. How is it doing that? When your body temperature gets higher, your blood vessels near the surface, and we talked about this when we talked about skin, they're going to widen up. Now, why do they widen? Because that's going to expose more blood flow and more blood to your skin's surface. And then remember, you sweat, and that is a cooling process, and that's going to release then the thermal energy to the air, and it's going to cool down your blood, which is going to circulate and help cool your body down. Now, the opposite is true if you have like coldness, you're out in the cold and you're shivering. Your body temperature will start to lower. And the vessels in your skin then, to counteract this, are going to get narrower. They're going to constrict. And that's going to decrease the flow of blood to your skin so that it doesn't get chilled. And that's going to help conserve the thermal energy and not lose it to the air, and also to help keep your internal organs warm. And then fight infection. Some blood cells fight infection and help protect you from harmful organisms such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. And we'll talk more about that when we look at immunity. But that's a very big, important part of our blood, is to help to fight infection. And of course, the main part of that is the leukocytes that are in the blood. Some blood stats. The first thing you need to know is that blood is a liquid tissue. You need to know that adults, we have about 3 to 5 quarts. And why does it vary so much? Because it can vary according to altitude. If somebody lived in a high altitude like Denver, Colorado, they are actually going to have more blood than those of us living around sea level. And why? Because the higher you go up in altitude, the less oxygen, the less air there is. So their body has to compensate for that. And the way that it compensates for that is to increase more blood production. Now, the other stats you don't need to know for a quiz or a test, but I want to give you an example of age-wise how much body, because an adult's about 3 to 5 quarts. Now remember, 4 quarts make a gallon, so it's approximately like a gallon of blood. Now, an 80-pound child, and some of you probably weigh around 80 pounds, you have approximately 2.5 quarts of blood. A little baby, a 9-pound infant, only has 10 ounces. Now, 16 ounces is 1 cup. So that's less than 1 cup of blood. Blood has 4 main parts. Be able to list these. And we're going to learn the science name. Your book just says red blood cells and white blood cells, plasma and platelets. But I want you to know the science name. Erythrocytes, that's the red blood cells. Leukocytes, which are the white blood cells. Plasma, which is the liquid portion. And platelets. And we're going to talk about each of these. So you can see the diagram there where you see each of them labeled. Erythrocytes. Now, there's a bunch of different facts. The best way to study this is to put one fact on each card and then put erythrocytes on the back. Now, their description, they look like a red biconcave disc. And it's sort of like a lifesaver without the middle out. I think there's some breath mints or something that still have the middle inside of them. That's what they look like. It looks like if you had a round red pillow and you took your fists and you punched them in the middle. And that makes it cave in on each side. That's a biconcave disc. And that's how they look. Now, it's interesting because most cells have at least one nucleus. Many have more than one nucleus. Red blood cells do not. No nuclei. Therefore, whenever they get DNA from blood, they're not getting it from the red blood cells because the DNA is in the nucleus. Of all the blood parts, the solid blood parts, which are the erythrocytes, the leukocytes, and the platelets, the red blood cells, the erythrocytes, are the most numerous. For every 600 of those biconcave discs, there's only one leukocyte. So that's how numerous. When we look at it under a microscope, you'll easily be able to spot erythrocytes because they'll be all over. They do not have the ability to move by themselves, so they're going with the flow. Wherever that plasma, the liquid portion, is flowing, they're following. Think of them like inner tubes following a river. That's what erythrocytes do. Their job is to carry oxygen and to carry carbon dioxide. So they're taking the oxygen from the lungs, that's where they get it. They're going to the body cells. They're giving it up to the body cells, remember, by diffusion. And then the carbon dioxide is diffusing into the blood. And then they're carrying that carbon dioxide to the lungs to get rid of it. Now, what enables a erythrocyte to carry oxygen is an iron-rich protein molecule that's called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is what also makes a red blood cell red. So it enables it to carry the oxygen, and it's what makes it red. So the other blood solid parts do not have hemoglobin. In the alveoli, remember, the oxygen comes in by diffusion and binds, and this is where the hemoglobin comes into place. It's actually going to bind. That oxygen, when it diffuses into the blood, is going to bind together with the hemoglobin on a red blood cell, on an erythrocyte. And it's released when the red blood cells come into close contact with the body cells. Now where? You need to know that blood parts and blood cells and other cells in your body, they all have lifespans and they vary. For a erythrocyte, the lifespan is 90 to 120 days. So that's about 3 to 4 months. 4 months is usually what they say is the lifespan of a erythrocyte. So there has to be a place where they are made because they don't last. It's not like they all die on the 120th day. No, you have some dying today, some being made today. You'll have some die tomorrow, some be made tomorrow. They are formed in your spleen, your liver, and your red bone marrow. Those are the 3 places that erythrocytes are made. You don't need to know this fact, but this is an interesting fact about the quantity of them inside. A normal person in that 3 to 5 quarts of blood has approximately 25 trillion erythrocytes. That's why they're the most numerous. That's enough erythrocytes to go completely around the equator 4 times in 3 to 5 quarts of blood. Here's what they look like under the microscope. They're not the ones with the dark purple, they're all the others. Kind of pinkish color. Those are erythrocytes. Now, since they are going to die, there's actually a place that they're going to be destroyed and their parts are going to be then reused. And that's the job mainly of the liver, but also the spleen. So the liver both makes, and the liver and spleen both make erythrocytes, and they destroy them when they're old, when they're breaking down, when they're non-functional. Now the rate you don't need to know, but look how many, because you got 25 trillion of them going around inside of you. They are filtered out and broken down by your liver and spleen at a rate of about 2 million of them per second. So just think about every second. So obviously that's how many are being made somewhere too. And here's showing you the life cycle of a erythrocyte. One of the main places made is the red bone marrow. It's not the only. And then erythrocytes will circulate for about 120 days, 4 months. And then they're old, aged, not working, so they're destroyed in the liver and spleen. And then you can see where some of the pieces of those cells are actually used. Now leukocytes. Leukocytes are the white blood cells. Now they're pointing, you can see there, to one, and on the lower right there's another one. You might say, that doesn't look white. No, if they were white under a microscope and you didn't stain them, guess what you would see? Nothing, because they're white. You just see light. So in order to see them, they use stain. Now think about what's absorbing the stain there of the cell parts that we have studied. If you said nucleus, you're right. Leukocytes can have one or more nuclei, and these obviously have more. They're actually named according to nuclei. All right, some facts about the leukocytes. They do not have hemoglobin, therefore they're not red. In size, they're about twice the size of a erythrocyte, so they're going to be the larger. They do not possess a definite shape because they have the ability to change their shape. And by changing their shape, that is how they can move. Remember, red blood cells don't have the ability to move. They just go with the flow. White blood cells, leukocytes, do. Now, why would they need that? Well, their job is to fight disease and intruders and poisons. Well, do you always have those inside your blood? No, they get in kind of tissue. You can get some in your skin. So they have to be able to leave the blood vessels and go to the area of where the infection is and do their job. So they're constantly changing their shape. If you've ever seen an amoeba move, that's a one-celled creature. They actually push out, the cytoplasm pushes out their cell membrane and makes what they call a false foot, a pseudopodia. and then they'll push out another one, and then the rest of the cytoplasm will follow. Well, that's how these leukocytes move as well. It's like an amoeboid movement. As I was saying, they have nuclei, and in a healthy person, you need to know the ratio of 1 leukocyte to every 600 erythrocytes. So for every one of those, you'd have 600 of the red. And it says a healthy person. See, if you're fighting a disease, your erythrocytes are going to be increased. Why? Because they're trying to fight the disease. That's an indication that you have an infection if you have a higher level of leukocytes. Now, they too have a lifespan. Now, because of their job, they're like on the front line. They're fighting diseases and germs and things, and pathogens that are trying to get inside of you and cause you harm and to take over your cells. So their lifespan can be 1 day up to 12 days. So not quite 2 weeks some of them live. And they too are made in bone marrow. Bone marrow is very important because it makes all 3 solid blood parts. It makes the erythrocytes, the leukocytes, and the platelets. But they're made in other places as well, so you need to know all the places that the leukocytes are made. Spleen, tonsils, and thymus gland are some others. Primary place, though, bone marrow. The body needs leukocytes, as we're saying, to defend the body from bacteria, viruses, and other harmful substances. So there's different kinds. God made different kinds of leukocytes because they have different functions in order to fight the disease. But they all have one of 2 functions, and this is actually how they fight disease. One way, one type of leukocyte, the way that they fight disease, is they actually eat it. So they engulf it and digest it. And that too is like the amoeba and how it feeds. It takes, like say, there's a pathogen out there. So it takes a pseudopodia and it'll surround it on the right side. Takes another pseudopodia, comes around on the left side, and then the 2 meet, and that forms a food vacuole. Then the digestive enzymes are released in there, and it starts eating the pathogen. Another type of leukocyte, their job is to produce antibodies, which we're going to be talking about, the blood antibodies. These are actually chemicals. You need to know what an antibody is. They're chemicals that attack invading organisms, or they attack the poison that is produced by those invading organisms. So 2 ways of killing off the predators. Eat them or attack them with antibodies, chemicals. Now, you don't need to know this, but I just want to show you how this battle goes on. An infection is the invasion of harmful organisms into the body. When the first leukocytes are not successful in stopping the infection, the invading organisms, they're free to multiply and to injure more body cells, which results in a swelling and a redness that we call inflammation in the infected part of the body. Chemicals that are released from the injured cells cause additional leukocytes to move out of the blood vessels in order to engulf and digest or to kill them with the antigens. And those chemicals are like SOS, but they need help. The leukocytes also digest and remove injured and dead body cells. So it's interesting how God gave them also the job to be the cleanup crew where the battle was. The accumulation of dead leukocytes, dead organisms, broken cells forms a thick fluid called pus, which is characteristic of infections. If you ever pop a zit, that's what you're popping out. That's pus from the infection that was in your pore. Now let's talk about the platelets. Platelets are the smallest of the 3 types of solid parts of blood. So the biggest white blood cells, leukocytes, red blood cells in the middle, erythrocytes, platelets the smaller. Now why are they smaller? They're actually just pieces of big cell that's been broken up. Platelets are small, irregularly shaped pieces of cells. Their job is to help in blood clotting, plug wounds, and stop bleeding by producing proteins. They are very small. They develop from large cells. It's actually the job of the bone marrow, so they are made in the red bone marrow as well. So the red bone marrow has these big cells that it purposely breaks up into small pieces. Because it's a piece of a cell, they do not have a nucleus, and they're small. They're about 1/2 to 1/3 the size of a erythrocyte. Their lifespan's not long, only about 1 week. Now the fluid portion of blood is called blood plasma. It technically is yellowish in color, and if you've ever seen somebody being given plasma, you've seen a bag that has a yellowish color in it, like the one there on the left. And it's the liquid part that is actually transporting the blood cells, and it also has dissolved other things, like the nutrients and so forth. You need to know that plasma is 90% water, which helps thin the blood and enable it to travel through those small blood vessels, the capillaries. This is showing you how blood clots form. This diagram is in your book. We are not going to go over all the processes, but it's interesting how when a blood vessel breaks for some reason, how he made your body to form a clot to plug up that hole so you don't keep bleeding. Now if that clot gets dislodged and starts floating around in your blood, that's when it's dangerous. So platelets rush to the tear and form a plug to stop the bleeding. A web of fibrin forms around the platelets to hold them in place. It's also going to hold red blood cells and other things. So it makes like a net. The more platelets and red blood cells are caught in the fibrin web, forming a blood clot. This is what it looks like under an electron microscope.